Hey everybody, Richie here from RecklessPixel and LensWizard.com, and this is part 2, a follow-up to part 1, where we created this HDR photograph using HDR merge in Lightroom. This time we're going to do it in Photoshop, and we're going to compare the two. So let's jump right in and hit it. Okay, so in part 1, if you didn't see it, there's a link for it down below. You can go back and watch that. But we created this HDR image using 3 exposures. And let's just jump right in and recap for anybody that didn't see part 1 and doesn't want to see it, because you might just want to see how to do it using Photoshop. Okay, so this was our image, our first image that was shot of the series that the camera said was the normal exposure. This is, at 1/20th of a second. And then this would be our second image right here. And this was the darker one. And this is shot a little faster, 1/40th. It let a little less light in. But for high dynamic range, it lets us now capture some of the clipping that would have occurred up there on the normal exposure. And if we go to this brighter exposure, well, it's brighter because it was 1/10 of a second. The camera fired just a little slower, and that let some more light come in. So the only thing moving in this image is these ribbons right here, because it was just a little bit breezy there on that Saturday morning that I was out there before the sun came up, waiting and freezing my fingers, and it was so cold. So anyway, and I love this church. Church is local to me. In the town of Flemington. So Flemington Presbyterian Church. So anyway, without further ado, let's go over here. So let's go back real quick. This is the DNG, and I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut of 9 just to set a blue label on that. We're going to open up and just see what our, well, let's get off of that. So we had adjusted our white balance, and we're not going to adjust anything. We're going to leave the settings just like they were for the Lightroom version of this. So now we're going to select the 2, and I'm going to have to do something here. I got to move. What we want to do is, you're going to see what I'm going to have to do. We want to go up here and select photo, and I have to move my screen capture software. Won't let me capture it. So we're going to go up here and we select photo, and we go down to edit in. And we want to go all the way down here to the bottom to merge HDR Pro in Photoshop. So let's do that. And it's going to bring us over into Photoshop. But meanwhile, I'm going to put Lightroom back where it's supposed to be. And then I'm going to go down here. So while it goes over into Photoshop, as you can see, it's bouncing around. It's making, you can't control this. It's bouncing around. It's making these different layers, and you just let it run through and do this. And the reason I'm not cutting this out to make the video shorter is I want you to see what it does. Now, again, because I'm using screen capture software, I have to bring the window in because it just made it extremely too large. And just stick with me while I okay, so here we are. We got everything moved around. Had to readjust because I'm using screen capture software at 1080p, and my monitor is a lot bigger than 1080, so it just everything gets out of whack. Okay, so this is the default window that you come up with, and let's just go down here in the lower left hand corner and look and see what we have. You're going to have, this is your +1 exposure, this is your regular exposure, and this is your -1. And you can't really, you can uncheck them. You can decide, like, if you don't want that one in there, but that's only really, that kind of serves a purpose if you're doing like a 7 exposure series or a 5. Anyway, getting right up into things, I have to say, and you have to understand this is kind of a core thing that you need to understand. In this window right here is where many atrocity has taken place in creating an HDR photograph. All of, or a lot of, the bad HDR photographs that were out there, like for the past 7 years, it all started right here in this window. Because they gave you all these controls and people just went crazy with it. I am one that doesn't really like to do a whole lot of altering in here. You have to come in here to let it merge and do its thing. And there are a few things that you need to do in here. But let's just look around. First, I just want to show you that you have 16-bit is kind of the default. And you can take it up to 32. If you take it up to 32, you lose all of your controls. Now again, I don't use hardly any of those controls, so I have worked with 32-bit. By default, it clicks complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw, which is very similar to Lightroom. So it's going to let you do some toning in there. As you notice, you can't move that slider, but if you untick that, you can now move this slider around. Doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose. If you notice where, if you move this slider down here and then you click this tick box, it puts it right back up to where like the best part of the histogram is, and that's it. So, and you can hit remove ghosts if you want, and it does that. So that's just what 32-bit does. I wanted to show you that that's available to you. I never really have used 8-bit, but I stick with 16. Now, we were in default, and default is, if you hit remove ghosts, which we want to do, okay, now we're not in default anymore, it goes to custom. Just wanted to point that out. And then smooth edges. Now these two tick boxes, you're going to want to make sure you have them checked before you hit that OK, because this thing has a great time of you checking it and then you make an adjustment and it unchecks it. Okay, so the only two, well, another thing I should point out is down here, it gives you a default exposure of 20. Okay, so you can add more if you want. Just so you know, a lot of when you make an adjustment in here, a lot of times you don't see the adjustment until you release your mouse from the click. So there, you can adjust it up and saturate it some more. You're really not, at 66, it's really not oversaturating that. But you know what? I want to add my color back in regular Photoshop. So I'm just going to put this back to 20 where it was. And the other thing, getting right to it, the only thing that I really change is detail. So detail and strength. So with detail, I have it highlighted. Holding down my shift key and my up arrow, I'm going to hit 2 times and take the detail up to 50. Now see, in Lightroom it doesn't give us these options. We don't have any control over this here. The only thing we have control over is ghosting and alignment. So then up here I'm going to go and put a 1.0, and I'm going to go up here, see it, make sure ghosting is checked, and that's really all I'm going to do. And you can kind of see in the preview window, we're starting to see more definition in these stones. It really kind of, that's where the detail and the strength perk that up. So I'm going to go ahead and commit and hit OK. You're going to see a status bar go across, and now it's again going to do its thing where it comes over here. It doesn't take it very long, and depending on your system, of course, and you don't want to get this out way too far. Come on there, guy. Okay, so we're going to zoom in, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and click Control J, and I'm actually going to do Control J again, and then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to hit a brightness adjustment layer, brightness and contrast. I'm going to brighten it up a little bit. Just want to see what I have there. And then just for the fun of it, and this is kind of really adding, like you want to talk about contrast, that's contrast. Hit multiply. But I'm going to bring it way back down. See, now I can use contrast up here, and I usually bring it down within the 24 to 30 range, something like that. So I can hit contrast up here, but I'm not really fond of that kind of contrast, at least not usually. So close that. Let's zoom in on. Now I will say that my focus point was someplace right around the door here. I do remember that. So just to know that that's what we focused on. I'm looking at these stones. This is just so you know what I'm looking at. I'm looking at this. If I turn that off, turn that, I kind of like that. But you know what? Let's do this. Let's turn that off. Let's bring our opacity back up, and let's go back to normal. Hit enter to accept that. And I'm going to right click on this. Actually, if I go up here and convert for smart filter, I'm going to turn it into a smart object. I know that it's a smart object because of my little icon down there. And I'm just going to go have fun with a plugin. Now you may not have this plugin, but this is a plugin that I've used many times. Sometimes I use Nik software, sometimes I just do it in Camera Raw. Now landscapes was the last one I used, and I kind of like that. But we're going to go up and go Intelligent Auto. This is a perfectly clear complete Photoshop version 3, just so you know. That's what this is. Vivid looks good. Vivid looks good, but I think I'm going to like landscape for this. And it kind of looks a little bit over the edge. If I wanted to, I could back my opacity down here. But where I'm going to, again, want to do most of my opacity, what happened here? I want to do most of it in Photoshop. So I'm going to make sure landscapes is checked, apply, come back, and then in here I can change my opacity if I want. I can bring it down, but I'm just going to leave it there for right now. Okay, so that completes the part of HDR Pro. We've made our HDR photo. We can save it. It'll take us back over into Lightroom as a TIFF, and you know, that's pretty much it. But now I'm going to continue on in this video, and we're going to compare what we did in Lightroom as to what we did in Photoshop. So hopping back over into Lightroom real quick, let's just select this DNG. We're going to hit Control E. That's going to fire us over into Photoshop, and let Photoshop do its thing. Okay, so I'm just going to take this image and I'm going to hit the V key, so that's my move key. I'm going to hold down the Shift key, hold down left click, slide up, and pop that right in there. Of course, it keeps giving me this. Okay, so it brings it in there, and I can kind of see, like, okay, so this, we're just going to name it real quick. We're going to call this Lightroom, and we're going to call this one Photoshop. And we're going to call it Photoshop Plus. And this one we're going to call Photoshop. So let's turn off the one that had the plugin, and let's just look at what we have here. This is Lightroom's version. That's Photoshop's version. Now, let's just bring our adjustment layer down there, brighten that up a little bit. Now let's go back up. There's Lightroom's version, and turn that off, and we get Photoshop's version. So I'm really inclined to like Photoshop's version a little bit more, because it comes down to those two adjustments that I made, possibly three, in HDR Pro. And that was, I was able to add strength, I was able to add detail, boost it up a little bit, and I was able to click on that edge smoothness, whatever that does, but it seems to define things. They both had deghosting, but it, again, sometimes your main element might need to be deghosted. Most often not. Deghosting usually applies to tree branches, or if somebody was walking through your image or something like that. So I'm really liking the Photoshop version. Again, let's go back up and look at the Lightroom version, Photoshop version. There's just so much more detail in the stones, and I don't feel that this is an overdone HDR. There's no haloing around anything. Everything looks still like a normal photo should. And in fact, if I was to bring up another adjustment layer of vibrance and saturation, I think if I ran my vibrance up quite a bit actually, it starts to put some color into those windows. If I wanted to bring the vibrance back down, but bring that up, my saturation, again, I don't feel that that photo right there is oversaturated. I feel that looks good in my opinion. Again, this is all subjective. I mean, even looking at this drain pipe, I really know what color that drain pipe is. I've paid attention to that, walked past that and looked at it, and that is pretty much the color of that drain pipe. So by bumping the saturation up to 23, the vibrance up to 42, it looks very much like the photo should, but we've given a little more dynamic range to it, and we've certainly been able to bump the detail up without sharpening. Now, if I wanted to, I could come get down here on this layer. Let me just turn it into a smart object real quick, just so that I can control this. And if I wanted to, I could bring up the sharpening. For this, I would use it. Well, let's get to sharpen. I would use Smart Sharpen. I like this big dialog box that Smart Sharpen gives me, and I would probably pump this up to like 150. That's just my preference. And up. And you kind of see your difference right there. Okay, so that's with the sharpening applied. Definitely made a difference there. If we turned on this one, so if we took, okay, so sharpening has been applied. And you can kind of see, the sharpening, it really did help. If we go over here and look at this door. Of course, we're not going to be zoomed in so close. Even if we were to print this out, it would be, would look something like this right here. And that looks pretty good. Against the other version, I still, if I was to take and put a brightness layer up, well, I did that in the wrong spot. Put a brightness layer up here and brighten this one. This plug-in version I really like. So let's see, plug-in version. Plug-in version versus Photoshop. Still liking the plug-in version. Okay, we're not going to drag this out any further. There was our comparisons. I really think the Lightroom module kind of fails in comparison to the regular Photoshop version here, or even the plug-in version that I created with Photoshop. Hey, you know what? We're going to bring this video to an end and call it a day. So if you're so inclined, please hit like. And if you're even more inclined, hit subscribe, come back. I'm harmless, I don't hurt anybody, and we just like to have fun and do little tutorials like this for the new photographers out there that are just wondering how to get stuff done. What really kind of inspired me about this was, it was actually a couple of months ago, somebody that I don't even know the person's name. I was out shooting and somebody came up to me and they had just gotten a DSLR. And it was just kind of a middle of the line. It was like, I don't know, a T6i or something like that. And they were saying like, it's got these features in it. And one of the things we started to talk about was bracketing. Guys like, this camera's got all these bells and whistles. I don't know what it is. The guy that sold it to me, at the counter told me that it does bracketing. He's like, and I don't know what bracketing even is. And then that's how we got talking about it. And I explained it to him, and I actually showed him. I showed him on a laptop how bracketing worked, and I kind of got him started. But I thought I'd put this tutorial out there to help anybody else that I might stumble across that wants to know how bracketing works and what it's for. Now, we didn't talk about bracketing here, but we talked about what we do after we bracket, and that's HDR photography. Hey, hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.